9 settlements. That is the number that changed everything on the southeastern front of Ukraine on March 2, 2026. 9 communities, liberated in a single operational sweep by Ukrainian airborne forces in the Oleksandrivka sector, a stretch of contested land sitting at the exact junction of 3 regions, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk. And if you think that sounds like a minor tactical footnote in a war that has dragged on for years, think again. Because what happened in those 9 settlements is not just about territory. It is about momentum, about technology, about the invisible war being fought in the electromagnetic spectrum, and about a strategic reality that is shifting beneath our feet right now. This is a story about how Ukraine managed to claw back ground that Russian forces had held for months, and why the method they used to do it might be the most important military innovation you have never heard explained clearly. It is also a story about a capital city that is dangerously unprepared for another brutal winter, about a president who is making one of the most audacious military trade proposals of the entire war, and about a number that should make every person watching this stop cold: 337. That is the number of Ukrainian prisoners of war who were not just killed in captivity, but, according to Ukraine's official ombudsman, brutally executed by Russian forces. Let that number sit with you for a moment. Because by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why all of these events are connected and exactly what they tell us about where this war is headed. To understand what happened in the Oleksandrivka sector, you need to go back to January 29, 2026. That date is not arbitrary. That is the exact day the Ukrainian military operation in that area began. And it is also the day Ukraine quietly flipped a switch that nobody in the Western press paid nearly enough attention to. Starting on January 29th, every Starlink terminal operating inside Ukrainian territory that was not registered in Ukraine's official state system simply stopped working. Done. Offline. And here is the critical detail that makes this so significant. Russian forces had been using captured, smuggled, and black market Starlink terminals extensively to coordinate their operations on Ukrainian soil. Starlink, for those who are not familiar, is SpaceX's satellite internet constellation, capable of providing high bandwidth, low latency internet connectivity almost anywhere on Earth. In a modern battlefield, that connectivity translates directly into command and control capability. It means officers can coordinate in real time, drone operators can receive live feeds, artillery spotters can transmit GPS coordinates instantly. When you cut that connectivity, you are not just cutting the internet. You are cutting the nervous system of the enemy's battlefield operations. Ukraine's new policy did exactly that. Every unregistered terminal, gone. And the Ukrainian airborne forces were blunt about the consequences for Russian units in the initial phase of their offensive push. The enemy's situational awareness was significantly degraded, and command and control of Russian units was complicated in the early stages. That is military language for, they were confused, they were blind, and we hit them while they were. And it worked. 3 additional settlements were completely cleared of Russian troops within days of the operation beginning, while fighting continued in several others. Ukrainian forces pushed Russian units out of fortified positions and severed key supply routes in the sector. Now, the airborne forces did acknowledge something important and honest. Even with degraded Starlink access, Russian forces did not stop their offensive operations entirely. They adapted, as armies always do. But that initial window of disruption gave Ukrainian forces a critical advantage in tempo, in initiative, and in the ability to dictate the terms of engagement. And here is where the broader strategic picture becomes clear. Ukraine's Supreme Commander, General Oleksandr Syrsky, made a declaration in the days following these operations that deserves serious attention. He stated publicly that Ukrainian forces recaptured more territory in February 2026 than Russia managed to capture during the same period. Read that sentence again carefully. For most of the past year, the narrative around this conflict had been one of slow, grinding Russian advances and Ukrainian defensive struggles. A month where Ukraine nets positive on territorial exchange is not a minor development. It is a signal that something in the operational equation is changing. But before you conclude that Ukraine has turned the corner definitively, you need to understand what is happening simultaneously in Kyiv, because the capital city is sitting on a ticking clock that has nothing to do with artillery or drones. On March 3, 2026, President Volodymyr Zelensky convened a meeting with regional leaders and mayors to review and approve winter preparedness plans for every region of Ukraine. The National Security and Defense Council went through each plan one by one, and almost all of them were approved. Almost. The one plan that did not make it through was the plan for Kyiv itself, home to approximately 4 million people, the largest city in the country, the symbolic heart of Ukrainian resistance. The capital's plan, in Zelensky's direct words, was not good enough, and Zelensky was not polite about it. If a plan is not presented, he said, the capital will face the same winter. He went further, addressing the fundamental obligation of governance in wartime. If the war does not end, people need to be sure they will have electricity despite all challenges. We need to work, not talk about it being impossible. We have no other choice. Those are not the words of a politician offering gentle encouragement. Those are the words of a wartime leader delivering an ultimatum to his own city's administration. To appreciate why this matters so much, you have to understand what Kyiv has already been through. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, the capital has been struck repeatedly in deliberate attacks targeting energy infrastructure. This past winter brought some of the most intense strikes yet. Russian missile and drone salvos knocked out power across large sections of the city for hours at a time. But perhaps worse than the blackouts was what happened to the central heating system. Moscow's forces specifically targeted the district heating infrastructure, the network of pipes and plants that keeps apartment buildings warm during the Ukrainian winter. When that system is damaged, it is not like losing electricity where you can use a generator or a battery backup. You cannot easily replace centralized heat. And in a city where the majority of residents live in Soviet-era apartment blocks that were designed around centralized heating infrastructure, losing heat in January or February is not an inconvenience. It is a survival crisis. This past winter was reportedly one of the harshest in over a decade, and residents of entire Kyiv neighborhoods spent weeks without adequate heating. Now imagine going through that again without a plan. That is the scenario Zelensky is trying to prevent. Each regional plan that was approved includes specific provisions for protecting energy infrastructure, expanding cogeneration capacity, which means the simultaneous production of heat and electricity from a single source, and decentralizing water and heating supply, so that a single Russian strike cannot knock out services for an entire district. These are the kinds of unglamorous, engineering-heavy solutions that rarely make headlines, but that determine whether civilians survive the winter or not. The pressure on Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has been mounting for some time. Critics, including some within the political establishment, have argued that the city's administration has been slow to act on precisely these infrastructure vulnerabilities. Zelensky's public statement that decisions will be taken in accordance with the law if plans are not implemented is widely read as a warning to Klitschko specifically. In Ukrainian political context, that phrase carries real weight. Before we go further, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something directly. If you are watching this channel, you are probably the kind of person who actually wants to understand what is happening in the world, not just consume headlines. You are not here for noise. You are here for the deeper analysis, the connections that the evening news never makes, the context that turns information into actual understanding. If that resonates with you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is built for people who are tired of being kept in the dark. Now let's get back to the story, because what comes next is arguably the most strategically bold move Zelensky has made in months. On the same day that Kyiv's winter plan was being rejected, Zelensky held a press conference and floated an idea that is either a stroke of strategic genius or a sign of how desperate Ukraine's air defense situation has become, or possibly both. He proposed swapping Ukrainian-manufactured interceptor drones for Patriot interceptor missiles held by the United States and its allies. Let that sink in. Ukraine is offering to trade its own domestically produced air defense technology to the United States in exchange for the American missiles that Ukraine critically needs to survive Russian ballistic missile attacks. This is not a conventional arms deal. This is a peer-to-peer technology exchange between a country fighting for survival and the most powerful military alliance on Earth. And the reason it is being floated right now tells you everything about the current state of Ukraine's air defense crisis. The Patriot system, for those unfamiliar, is one of the most sophisticated ground-based air defense platforms ever built. It uses PAC-3 interceptor missiles, which cost approximately $4 million each, to destroy incoming ballistic missiles. Ukraine has multiple Patriot batteries, but the country is facing a severe shortage of PAC-3 missiles. Russian forces have been systematically targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure with ballistic missiles precisely because they know that Ukraine is running low on the interceptors, needed to stop them. Every ballistic missile that gets through is a heating plant destroyed, a power substation knocked offline, a transformer station turned to rubble. The calculus is brutal and deliberate. At the same time, something significant has been unfolding in the Middle East that creates an unexpected opening for this proposed exchange. Following the outbreak of renewed joint U.S. and Israeli military operations against Iranian-linked targets in the region, Houthi and Iranian proxy forces have dramatically escalated their use of Shahed drones, the Iranian-produced loitering munitions that Russia has also been using extensively against Ukraine. U.S. forces and allied assets in the region are being subjected to drone swarms of a type and density that American air defense systems were not optimized to defeat efficiently. The Patriot is extraordinarily effective against ballistic missiles, but using a $4 million PAC-3 round to knock down a $50,000 Shahed drone is not a sustainable equation. And here is the critical detail. Ukraine has spent the last 2 years developing, refining, and deploying interceptor drone technology specifically designed to defeat exactly these kinds of slow-moving, low-flying kamikaze drones. Ukraine is not just the biggest victim of Shahed attacks. Ukraine is the world's leading innovator in countering them. No other country has the operational experience, the data, or the field-tested solutions that Ukraine has developed in the crucible of its own survival. Zelensky's proposal, then, is not as outlandish as it might first appear. He is essentially saying, you have missiles we need to survive Russian ballistic attacks. We have drone interceptor technology you need to survive the Shahed threat in the Middle East. Let us make this work. If they give us interceptors, we will give them interceptors. It is a fair trade, he said. The strategic logic is sound. The question is whether Washington's political establishment can move fast enough and with enough flexibility to actually execute an exchange of this nature. And the clock is ticking. Air Defense Chief Yuri Inat acknowledged in early February that the shortage of air defense missiles had left some Ukrainian defense batteries without full protection during critical periods, including in the days leading up to anticipated Russian strike waves. A window of vulnerability in Ukraine's air defense is not an abstract strategic problem. It is a direct pathway to more destroyed hospitals, more collapsed apartment buildings, more civilians who wake up in the morning to find the city around them a little darker and a little colder. And now we arrive at the number that I promised you would stop you cold. 337. That is the number of Ukrainian prisoners of war who have been, according to Ukraine's official parliamentary ombudsman, brutally executed by Russian forces. Not killed in combat, not died of wounds, executed. The Ombudsman's office documented these cases through forensic evidence, survivor testimony, witness accounts, and the painstaking work of human rights investigators who have been cataloging Russian treatment of POWs since the early days of the full-scale invasion. The word brutally is not rhetorical flourish in the official statement. It refers to documented methods that violate not just the Geneva Conventions, which govern the treatment of prisoners of war and have been binding international law since 1949, but that violate the most basic standards of human conduct recognized across every civilization on Earth. The pattern here is not one of isolated incidents perpetrated by rogue soldiers acting outside their orders. The scale, the consistency, and the geographic spread of documented cases point to something systemic, something that reflects either official policy or an institutional culture that tolerates and enables the killing of prisoners. The geopolitical implications of this documentation extend far beyond the immediate moral horror. These documented executions feed directly into the ongoing debate in Western capitals about the terms under which any future ceasefire or peace settlement should be reached. Ukraine's legal team and allied governments have been building a massive evidentiary record intended for eventual proceedings before international tribunals. Every documented execution strengthens that case. Every documented execution also makes it harder for Western leaders to sell their populations on any peace deal that does not include robust accountability mechanisms, because the domestic political question in every NATO country eventually becomes, are we asking Ukrainian victims to live alongside the people who did this to their soldiers? That is not a question with an easy answer, and it is a question that will shape negotiations for years to come. Step back for a moment and look at all of these threads together, because they do not exist in isolation. They form a picture of a war in 2026 that is fundamentally different from the war of 2022 or even 2024. Ukraine is now leveraging technological innovation, both in offensive drone operations and in defensive electronic measures like the Starlink denial policy, to compensate for manpower and ammunition deficits that remain significant. The liberation of 9 settlements in the Oleksandrivka sector is a tactical success, but its deeper significance is methodological. It demonstrates that Ukraine has found ways to degrade Russian command and control capability that go beyond simply shooting at people. The Starlink cutoff is a form of electronic warfare that costs Ukraine very little relative to its effect on Russian operational coherence. At the same time, the crisis in Kyiv's winter preparedness reveals the enormous administrative and infrastructure challenges that the Ukrainian state continues to face even after 4 years of large-scale war. There is a tendency in Western coverage to talk about Ukraine as either winning or losing in purely military terms. But the war is also being fought in the administrative capacity of local governments to keep civilians alive through the winter, in the engineering choices of electricity grid operators, in the political decisions about which officials get removed and which get second chances. Zelensky's public confrontation with Kyiv's administration is part of this larger struggle, and the fact that he is willing to create a public crisis around it, even in the capital of his own country, tells you something important about how he views the stakes. The Patriot-drone swap proposal sits at the intersection of Ukraine's military desperation and its growing technological credibility. For years, Western partners debated whether to give Ukraine this system or that system, always worrying that Kyiv could not operate sophisticated equipment effectively. Those debates look different now. Ukraine has not just operated sophisticated Western equipment effectively, it has created sophisticated equipment of its own that the most powerful military alliance in history does not know how to replicate quickly enough to meet an emerging threat. That is a dramatic reversal of the dynamic that defined the early years of Western support, and it opens up new categories of defense cooperation that simply did not exist before. And hovering over all of it, the 337. Those are not statistics. They were people. They had names, they had families, they had whatever moments of hope or despair defined their experience of captivity before someone with a weapon ended it. The documentation of their death serves a purpose beyond grief. It is the foundation of accountability, the raw material of justice, and ultimately one of the most powerful arguments against any peace settlement that trades accountability for expediency. The pressure to eventually end this war through negotiation will not go away. The economic costs, the human toll, the strain on Western political will are all real. But the 337 are also real. And any framework for ending this conflict that does not reckon honestly with what that number represents will be built on a foundation that cannot hold. This war in 2026 is not the same war it was in 2022. The weapons are different. The tactics are different. The strategic calculations on both sides have shifted in ways that nobody fully anticipated. Ukraine has survived things that most analysts said it could not survive. Russia has adapted to things that most analysts said would end its ability to fight. Neither side has achieved its stated objectives. And the next chapter of this story is being written right now in 9 liberated settlements near Oleksandrivka, in the meeting rooms where Kyiv's officials are being told their plans are not good enough, in the diplomatic channels where someone is asking whether an interceptor drone deal can actually be brokered, and in the forensic files of Ukraine's ombudsman's office, where names are being added to a list that never should have existed. What do you think happens next? Do you believe the Patriot swap proposal will actually go anywhere? And could it become a model for a new kind of defense cooperation between Ukraine and its Western partners? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This is exactly the kind of conversation this channel exists for, and I read every response. If this video gave you something to think about, share it with someone who is trying to make sense of what is happening in the world right now, and we will see you in the next one.